Good morning. This is a mic check. This is Richard Wallace. Can you hear me? Hi, Lynn. Are you there by any chance?
Hi, Richard. This is Kanti. We can hear you.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. How are you doing, Conti?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing well. A little sinus this morning, but I'm doing well.
Did you have a good summer?
Yeah, it was very busy and lots of different, hot topics came up. So I was all over the place, but yeah, we had a pretty good summer.
Yeah, I was going to say that you were going to say, oh, I had a very restful summer that I forgot.
No.
Well, Thanksgiving is not too far.
Yeah, well, believe it or not, the fall weather is actually coming in. I can see it now. It's I don't mind the fall though, but winter I don't care about. But fall I can deal with.
That's right. Thank you.
Mhm.
Right.
And then he said, so who's gonna write it up? I said, the attorney will write it up. He's gonna ask you the questions so that he can come up with.
Well, that's going to add more if I'm going to do the first.
Because I'm getting ready to call him and tell him.
Right. I mean, first I thought I was just reading. I told him to call you, actually.
That's
Hey, Lynn. Good morning.
what the guy, what I told him I would do.
Okay.
So I just did.
All right, so you can hear me now?
Yes, ma'am. Low and clear.
Okay, great. Hey, Richard. Cool. Hey,
As
Mr.
usual, Lynn. As usual, you have that that sunshine behind you, that ray of light behind you. It's so beautiful.
I always have rays of light behind me. I do that on purpose. It's a purposeful.
Hello, everyone. Sorry about that.
Good morning, Mr. Collins. How are you, sir? Hope you had a
How are
good
you?
summer.
Great summer. I mean, it's too fast. It just
Too fast.
it's here and gone, here and gone. Let me get some water real quick, and I'll be right with you. Okay.
Okay. While we can hear you, you are a little low on volume. So
You
just,
said you can't hear me.
well, we can hear you. You're just not, we are going to try and fix the volume here on our end. So,
Okay. All right. Right.
Would one of you all mind speaking for a minute or two? We're trying to test the volume in the boardroom. And
Okay, Catherine Reed here. Happy to test the volume in the boardroom. Does it work? You got it? Super
Yes.
fantastic if everyone can hear.
thank you so very much, Mayor. You were loud and clear. Thank you kindly.
Awesome, glad to help.
Lynn and Conti, it's 12 noon, so we want to get started. Right. Okay. Well, I'd like to say greetings to everyone. My name is Ruben Collins. I'm president and chair of the Transportation Planning Board, and I call this September 20th, 2023 virtual meeting to order. Most of our staff will be participating in the meeting in the COG building, and if you have any issues with your audio, please email Conti or Lynn. For the benefit of those observing this meeting on the YouTube channel, here is how I plan to facilitate today's meeting. During agenda items, I will have the presenters complete their briefing and then we'll turn to members for questions or comments. I will then call on members by jurisdiction. When I call on your jurisdiction, you could speak by starting with your name, or you can use the raised hand icon and staff will help me identify you. As it relates to action items, after the presentation, I will first seek a motion to adopt a resolution, followed by a second to the motion that was made. I will then turn to members for questions or comments, after which I will call for a vote. When a vote is called, I will ask just for nays and abstentions and take the rest as yes votes. I request members who speak or who vote nay or abstention to please state their name and jurisdiction. So with that stated, Lynn, if you could get started with the roll call.
Great, thanks. Welcome, everyone. So I'm going to start by listing your jurisdiction or agency, and if you could state your name, I'd appreciate it. Also, this is all virtual, so we will be able to capture folks that log in later as well. So let's start with the District of Columbia. District Council, Ms. Brooke Pinto. District Council, Charles Allen. District Council, Christina Henderson.
I'm here.
Thank you. District Department of Transportation.
Sandra Marks representing CDOT.
Thank you. District Office of Planning.
Becca Schwartzman, present.
Thank you. Moving on to Maryland, City of Bowie. Charles County.
Here.
Thank you. College Park.
Here.
Thank you. Frederick County. City of Frederick.
Present.
Kelly Russell, gotcha. City of Gaithersburg. City of Greenbelt.
Emmett Jordan here.
Summit. City of Laurel.
Brian Lee here.
Brian. Montgomery County.
Marilyn Balcom here.
Thank you. Montgomery County Executive. Prince George's County.
Victor Weisberg.
Prince George's County Council. City of Rockville.
Bridget Donald Newton here.
Bridget. Tacoma Park.
Cindy DeBala here.
Thank you. Maryland Department of Transportation.
Heather Murphy here.
Oh, there's Heather. I see your name. Thanks, Heather. Maryland House of Delegates.
Corman here.
Thanks. Maryland Senate.
Nancy King here.
Great, thanks, Ms. King. Okay, moving on to Virginia. City of Alexandria. Arlington County.
Max Carnton is present.
City of Fairfax.
Catherine Reed, present.
Thank you. Fairfax County.
Walter Alcorn.
Mr. Walkinshaw, I saw him too. Falls Church. Fauquier County. Loudoun County.
Kristen Umstadt, present.
Rob Donaldson, present.
Thanks, Kristen and Rob. City of Manassas.
Pam Sebesky here, sorry.
Great. Oh, no, you're good. Thank you. City of Manassas Park.
Jeanette Rischel here.
Thank you. Prince William County.
Ann Wheeler here.
Vic Angry here.
Great. Virginia Department of Transportation.
John Lynch here.
Great. Virginia House of Delegates.
Delegate David Reed, present.
Thank you. And Virginia Senate.
Senator Dave Marsden, present.
Great. Moving on to WMATA.
Hey, Lynn,
Yes.
this is Kanik, City of Alexandria. Sorry, a
Oh,
little
great. Gotcha. Yep. Thanks, Kanik. WMATA. Okay, we'll keep an eye out for them. Moving on to our ex officio members, Federal Highway Administration, Federal Transit Administration, National Capital Planning Commission, Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority, and Laurel, I saw you, National Park Service.
Hi, Lynn. Laurel here.
Great, thanks. All right, so that concludes roll call. We have a quorum. Thank you, Chair Collins.
Thank you. And at this time, Lynn, if there were any public comments, could you please summarize?
Great. Were there any public comments? Let me settle in and get started. All right. Between noon on Tuesday, July 18th and noon on Tuesday, September 19th, the TPB received 310 individual project comments from our Visualize 2050 initial project list feedback form, and we received 4 comments submitted via email. So a summary as well as each one of those comments can be found on our meeting page. So as you know, we've created a project list feedback form on our comment page to help share specific project comments with project sponsors for Visualize 2050. We will continue to share the comments twice a month as we're getting them in, both at technical committee and here at TPB. Those comments are attached to our memo. Due to timing, I'm hoping you'll read through some of these yourselves, both summarized and provided in full, and which will also be shared again this fall together when the project inputs are due. We specifically want to give a shout out to Fairfax County and to Prince William County for each of them hosting their own public outreach activities that did help contribute to our high numbers and our comments received this month. So thank you both. Next, I'll briefly summarize the rest of the comments that just came in on our meeting page. The summary is on, so this summary that I'm about to go through, you can scroll through to page 6 of the PDF if you want to follow along. So a person named Ann Havman, General Counsel for the Chesapeake Climate Action Network, submitted a letter detailing comments about the TPB's greenhouse gas plan, supporting Mr. Abern's prior comments on environmental justice. Havman's comments recommend that the TPB adjust its climate goals to no less than a mandatory 60% reduction by 2030 and a net zero emissions by 2045 to meet the challenge of climate change. Havman added that the region should adopt aspirational goals of 65% greenhouse gas reduction by the years 2028 to 2030 and 20% beyond net zero by 2040 to 2045. Next set of comments, George Abern followed up on previous comments, outlining his concern about environmental justice and transportation planning in the National Capital Region. Abern also expressed support for comments I just referred to, the comments submitted by Chesapeake Climate Action Network. Abern attached several letters that he submitted to other agencies through their public comment processes. I'll go through just a summary of what those are right now. So first, he attached a letter addressed to the Metropolitan Washington Air Quality Committee regarding environmental justice. Second, there are letters submitted to the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality with a supplemental attachment and to the DC Department of Environment and Energy regarding their state implementation plan. Third, he attached a letter he submitted to EPA and FTA regarding environmental justice in the Metropolitan Washington region. And fourth, he attached a copy of a submitted Title VI complaint, which included a supplemental attachment with a summary of concerns. Next up, our third set of comments that we received were from Jason Stanford, who's the president of the Northern Virginia Transportation Alliance, providing comments following up concerns he shared with us at the July 2023 TPB meeting. So as requested by the TPB, staff provided a response to Mr. Stanford's July comments. You will find those in our current September mailout under item 5, the steering committee and directors report. So Mr. Stanford's new set of comments provide additional information from the LaHood report and Northern Virginia Transportation Commission data in response to the staff memo that we had just posted last week. So his comments specifically provide recommendations for WMATA to address the funding gap.
Hey.
Lastly, Bill
Yeah.
Pugh, our senior policy fellow for the Coalition for Smarter Growth, provided 2 comments via email. The first comment expresses concern about the lack of public engagement opportunities for the VDOT, MDOT, and DDOT carbon reduction strategies before they submit the carbon reduction strategies to the USDOT. The second comment concerns the COG Round 10 cooperative forecasts. Pugh noted that the promising trend for infill development, but expressed concern about the east-west divide in housing and jobs. So as I mentioned, all the comments are found on our meeting page. That concludes my report. Thank you, Chair Collins.
Thank you, Lynn. That's a rather robust summary report. At this time, our second agenda item is approval of the July 19th, 2023 minutes. So I will be entertaining a motion to approve the July 19th, 2023 minutes. And again, if you could, with the motion and second, please state your name or jurisdiction.
I move for approval, Pam Sebesky, Manassas City.
Thank you.
I second. Tax current on is Harlington County.
It's been moved and properly second. And we'll start by asking for any nays or abstentions to approving the minutes.
Fairfax City abstains. I wasn't there.
Duly noted. Any other nays or abstentions? Appearing that there are none, the motion to accept the July 19th minutes passes. Next, we'll have a report from the technical committee. Mr. Rawlings, are you here with us today?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. The technical committee met on Friday, September the 8th. A written meeting summary is included with your meeting material, so I'll keep this report brief. 3 items were reviewed for inclusion on today's TPB agenda. This included a briefing on the draft National Capital Region Freight Plan, an overview of new federal funding programs for carbon reduction, and a briefing on the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program. Additionally, 6 items were presented for information and discussion. These included a briefing on the regional electric vehicle planning efforts, a briefing on Visualize 2050, a briefing on the 2022 State of Public Transportation Report, a briefing on the draft Critical Urban Freight Corridor Designation updates for the District of Columbia, a briefing on transportation inequities in disadvantaged communities, and a briefing on the upcoming Vehicle Probe Data Users Group Bottlenecks Workshop. That concludes my report, Mr. Chairman. I'd be happy to take any questions.
And thank you very much, Mr. Rawlings. Are there any questions from our members from the District of Columbia? Any members from the state of Maryland? The state of Virginia? And any other agencies? Okay, thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is a report from the Community Advisory Committee. And we have with us the chair, Mr. Richard Wallace. Good afternoon. Good seeing you.
Good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. Chair, I'll be very brief today. I'm a little sinus this morning, so I don't want to hold the meeting up any longer. So bear with me for a second, please. Thank you very much, Chair Collins. The Community Advisory Committee met in a hybrid format last Thursday, September 14th. The committee received a presentation from the Maryland and Virginia Department of Transportation staff about their funding and project prioritization process. Notably, the committee expressed their interest in how MDOT addressed accessibility, safety, and the GHG emission reduction in their goals and priorities. Both presentations received questions about funding related to projected budget shortfall, the impact of inflation, and anticipated actions to address WMATA's funding needs. The committee also received an overview about the draft National Capital Region Freight Plan from TPB staff. Committee members asked several clarifying questions about the National Capital Region Freight Plan regarding the equity analysis and types of freight in the region. There were also discussions about transportation policies or infrastructure that impact freight and passenger travel, including freight restrictions on I-95, shared use of freight rail for passengers, passenger train, and projects to rebuild tunnels to allow for full height and double stack trains. The next CAC meeting will be held October 12th in a virtual format. Chairman Collins, this is my presentation. Are there any questions?
Thank you. Members, are there any questions for Mr. Wallace at this time? From the District of Columbia? From the state of Virginia? From the state of Maryland and or any agencies? Again, thank you for that presentation. The second item that we have is a report of the Access for All Advisory Committee by Vice Chair Christina Henderson.
Thank you, Chair Collins, and good afternoon, everyone. The Access for All Committee met in a virtual format on Monday, September 18th. The committee discussed the funding and project prioritization processes for Virginia, Maryland, and WMATA. We had presentations from VDOT, MDOT, and WMATA. The presentations were part of a series from various state agencies across 2 TPB advisory committees to inform about state and local processes and how they coordinate with TPB. We also received an exciting update from Mohammed Khan, TPB's Enhanced Mobility Program Manager, about the 2023 solicitation process. Just as a refresher for you all, the Enhanced Mobility Grant Program provides grant funding to community organizations who have good ideas about how to enhance. And we are about to begin that process. They had 3 pre-solicitation meetings, and 58 people representing 45 organizations expressed interest in applying for grants, which is a huge number of folks. We will kick off our selection committee work in October, on October 16th, but there's still time for individuals to submit applications. So for those of you who had been publicizing this to your various jurisdictions, your efforts were great. Now it's just time for folks to get those applications in by the deadline. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Vice Chair Henderson. Are there any questions for the Vice Chair? From the state of Maryland, the District of Columbia, state of Virginia, and or agencies? Thank you very much. The next agenda item is the steering committee actions and report of the director.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the board. A detailed report was included in your packet. It's a rather large packet this month, 131 pages. So I will just highlight the items for you, but I'll be happy to answer questions on those. The steering committee met on September 18th, and the following actions were taken. First, it approved a joint letter from the TPB, MVAC, and COGS CPC committee in support of a proposal by the National Highway Safety Administration, NHTSA, to revise the average fuel economy standards for passenger cars, light-duty trucks, and heavy-duty pickup trucks and vans. This proposed rule will help reduce fossil fuel consumption, which will then help reduce on-road emissions, whether it's ozone precursors or greenhouse gases. So this makes perfect sense for the TPB to support it. MVAC and CPC are scheduled to review this joint letter at their meeting next Wednesday, and this will be submitted by the deadline of October 16th. Second, the committee approved Maryland Department of Transportation's request to have commuter connections expand the employer outreach service they provide currently to the members within the TPB planning area to the rest of the state of Maryland. We are happy to provide this enhanced service. Maryland Department of Transportation will be providing additional funds to commuter connections to take on this task. Lastly, the committee approved 3 sets of amendments to the TPB's Transportation Improvement Program, the TIP, one each by the District of Columbia, Maryland, and Virginia Departments of Transportation. In the District of Columbia's amendment added funds, about $38 million, to a new railroad bridge over New York Avenue in Northeast. But importantly, it reconciled its 4-year planned funding outlays for a large number of projects and programs, about 50 different projects and programs. Over the 4-year period, these 50 projects and programs have a total outlay of about $1.5 billion. But the reconciliation towards the fiscal year end had a net reduction of about $450 million over the next 4 years. Details of these changes at individual project level begin on page 13. And my apologies for a typo in my summary memo on page 2, where instead of 438 million, it says 4,438 million. I wish we had that kind of money. The Maryland amendment added about $667,000 for a new study that is focused on areas of persistent poverty in Prince George's County, and particularly to look for ways to improve traffic safety, stormwater management, streetscapes to discourage crime, and also importantly to assess how to extend its bus rapid transit corridor to Prince George's County Community College. The amendment also adds about $31 million for Prince George's County to purchase 20 zero-emission buses, battery electric buses, upgrade the electrical system at their transit depot, and also add electric chargers at multiple transit hubs. Details of those projects are on page 82. And lastly, VDOT's amendment added about $252 million for a couple different rail programs, about $239 million for in-state support for Amtrak services, but also about $29 million for the city of Alexandria to purchase zero-emission buses and add some additional EV charging units at its bus facility. VDOT's amendment also added funding for an ongoing project on Fairfax County Parkway. Finally, the TPB is also this month glad to provide 6 letters of support for its member agencies who are applying for federal grant applications. 3 of these are from the District Department of Transportation and 1 from VDOT, and these are for federal multimodal project grant funding. And there are 2 applications from Maryland Department of Transportation for the federal Reconnecting Communities and Neighborhood Grant. We've been issuing these letters of support on a monthly basis, and it's great to see so many of the agencies availing themselves of new federal grants, and we hope that these are successful. Moving on to the director's report, I'm glad to report that WMATA has agreed to renew its support for the Street Smart Safety Campaign with about $150,000 in funding. That letter from WMATA is on page 118. Also, a few additional announcements. This Friday, September 22nd, is Car Free Day. This is a worldwide event when people are encouraged to take a free pledge to go car free or car light. Our goal for this year is to have 5,000 pledges. So those of you who have not yet pledged, you can do so by going to carfreemetrodc.org. Also, please note that in next month, just ahead of the board meeting at noon, we plan to have a work session for the Transportation Planning Board focusing on intercity passenger rail passenger transit travel. The plan is to have representatives from Amtrak, Union Station, the American Bus Association, Virginia Passenger Rail Authority, and MDOT speak to the TPB about their current plans and their infrastructure and their asset situation with regards to supporting the intercity passenger travel into and out of the region and what issues they might be facing and how the TPB could assist in that. Also, throughout October 2023, we will be conducting a survey of the air passengers at the 3 major airports in our region. This air passenger survey will be done at gate. It's a lobby survey that's asking departing air passengers about the purpose of their travel, how they travel to the airport, and other key information to support the region's airport system planning and ground access planning. So in case you begin to hear from anybody what's going on, we wanted you to be aware. And last but not least, I am thrilled to report that the director of the TPB's Commuter Connections program, Nicholas Ramphus, was inducted into the inaugural Hall of Fame of the Association of Commuter Transportation. This is a national organization, and he was inducted into their first round on August 2nd. Nick has been with Commuter Connections for about 27 years now. Before that, he worked on reducing single occupant vehicles travel, increasing transit and ride sharing in Detroit, in San Diego. Nick, along with a group of excellent staff in the program over the past 27 years, has established the TPB's Commuter Connections program as nationally recognized gold standard for implementing travel demand management strategies. I wanted you to be aware that one of your key programs is really held in very high regard, and its staff has been honored in this way. So we will want to acknowledge and thank Nick and his staff for their excellent work and for this honor. So with that, that concludes my report. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Yes. Are there any questions for Conti at this time? In the state of Maryland, from the district, from the state of Virginia, and any agencies. Yeah, again, thank you for that presentation. This is the 6th item on the agenda, the chairman's remarks. I'll be very brief. It's hard to believe that the summer is past and we're moving forward towards the tail end of my tenure as chair of the TPB. I look forward to continuing the momentum that we put in place. Prior to our last meeting, and since that last meeting, the COG board during its retreat focused primarily on some of the financial challenges that WMATA is facing to secure fundings for FY 2025. That will be something, and I hopefully our executive director is on. Is Mr. Mercer on as well? Is he here today?
Yes.
Okay. He will talk in more detail about that. We at the TPB have been working on updating our long-range transportation plan and changed the schedule to provide WMATA with 6 additional months to work on this issue. And I'm glad to welcome at this time our executive director, Clark Mercer, who will talk in more detail about the WMATA issue and other very important matters. And at this time, Clark, how are you?
I'm doing well, Chair. Thank you for having me.
Good.
Auntie, do we turn these on? Is this okay? Good. All right. We've got new equipment. I want to make sure it's working. Going to recap some items that I'm sure folks are all aware of, but perhaps package it together so you get a sense of what COG is doing vis-a-vis the fiscal cliff that we've all heard about from WMATA. So we had our retreat now a couple months ago in Maryland. Very good turnout. We had leadership from governor's offices and Governor Moore, Governor Youngkin, Mayor Bowser, their departments of transportation. And we had Randy Clark from WMATA to do a deep dive at the retreat on the fiscal cliff. that WMATA is facing. A couple of comments about the fiscal situation at WMATA, and then specific items that we're pursuing to try to get our arms around that. One, this is not unique to WMATA. There are transit systems across the country that are suffering due to a combination of inflation and loss of ridership to COVID, and escalating costs due to personnel, some disparity between what they're bringing in and what's going out the door in terms of the balance sheet. And so WMATA is not any different than some of the other large metro systems, although the way metro is structured here in DC, as you all know, is unique. So this is a structural issue that we're looking at, and we're looking at both operations and capital for metro. I think folks are all aware that in 2018, the region came together with the states and the feds to inject more money into the capital flow for metro. That $500 million a year in 2018 doesn't go as far in 2023 as we would like, and we all know that in a few years, there's some capital constraints that WMATA is facing. So rather than just look at operating right now, we're looking at both streams of revenue. Three groups that have been put together. It sounds like a lot. One of them is more of a check-in type group monthly, which I'll get to. But the first is the Metro Strategy Group, and that's a group of elected officials from Maryland, DC, and Virginia, including representation from the mayor's office and the governor's office. A check-in once a month to see where those jurisdictions are at in terms of legislative initiatives, what their concerns and thoughts are that need to be addressed by WMATA in order to get the support we need to give WMATA the kind of fiscal security it needs moving forward. So we had the first meeting of that group, we had two meetings of that group. I think they've been productive. We've gotten all those jurisdictions to the table. I think having the governor's offices there active and asserting their support for Metro has been really important, although they've also cited issues that they want explored and run to ground, before they can give any sort of full-throated support for any financing mechanism moving forward. What are the finances of Metro and what does that fiscal cliff really entail? That group of electeds has asked the CAOs and associated stakeholders in the region to work with Metro on a weekly basis to really get our arms around. We've heard $750 million is the deficit and that it grows each year out. About 70% of that is personnel costs. But I think our electeds really want the CAOs and the CFOs to be in the room with Metro and going line by line through the budget and really understanding what those numbers entail. So the cost structure group is the real roll up your sleeves, sharpen your pencils, and get the work done type group. And they have met now twice. They're meeting again this coming Monday and again on October 2nd. And Glenn Lee, the chief financial officer from the District of Columbia, is terrific. He has a staff that is dedicated to working, with Metro. Metro is committed to answering the questions that the CAOs have. There are a lot of groups in the DC area that advocate or have thoughts they want to share with Metro, and Randy and his team kind of have one briefing after another most days to bring some of these groups up to speed. So we have been in touch with kind of the Metro Now Coalition and related stakeholders and have encouraged if there's some substantive questions on the budget, structural questions that they would like run to ground, to please let us know. We're happy to work with Metro through that cost structure group. The other piece that we hear kind of often, Randy and the team at WMATA have really good news to share in terms of level of ridership, level of service, customer satisfaction. 2 weeks ago, you may have seen that there's some stations where they have put in the new fare gates, turnstiles, and there's a 70% reduction in fare evasion at those stations. That's a good news story. And we have witnessed that perhaps the good news stories for Metro are not getting out into the public space like they should and not saturating. So we have asked our communications team here at COG to pull together the public information officers and the chief comms officers from not only the public sector, but Metro Now Coalition, chambers of commerces, the folks that are advocating and they have a special interest in Metro, to come together once a month to hear from Metro, to hear from us, to flag good things, to flag issues, and to make sure all of our groups are talking. So that first meeting is the next week. And I will flag that next week Metro is having a board meeting, and they just closed the books for their last fiscal year a couple weeks ago. They have had a cost savings reduction task force that is working to be in a position to present next week what the next year's budget looks like for Metro. And I would flag that for everyone because as we work towards a sustainable solution for Metro moving forward, they're sensitive to the fact that we've got to get through the next fiscal year and provide terrific service. But it's going to take some time to really get our ducks in a row in terms of what a holistic fix for Metro might look like. And I'll end by, and Conti can kind of correct me on this, but I think it's October, late October, early November, the cost structure group for the CAOs will be issuing an interim report with their initial findings of assessing what that fiscal cliff looks like, what the drivers of that are, and thoughts about how to address that moving forward. And I suspect a consequence of that report will be the COG board instructing that CAO group to continue their good work and help come up with some long-term solutions for Metro. But the first thing we need to do is level set and understand what the situation is before we start brainstorming long-term solutions. So I wish I came to you this week at TPB and had a solution for the fiscal cliff. I don't, but we're on a glide path to figuring it out with your all support. And happy to take any questions you might have if that's appropriate.
Members, are there any questions for Executive Director Mercer?
I don't see any hands raised.
All right. And so we'll continue to move forward. The next agenda item is National Capital Region Freight Plan approval. You will be hearing from Andrew Meese. But before we hear from Andrew, is there a motion to adopt Resolution 3-2024?
So moved. Bridget Newton.
And is there a
Second,
second?
Pam Sabeski, Manassas City.
It's been moved and properly second. Now at this time, we'll provide an opportunity for questions. And I guess, Andrew, you will begin your report this time, and then we'll provide an opportunity for questions.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, members of the board. You will recall that I was here in July and did a complete briefing on the draft National Capital Region Freight Plan update. We did receive several comments from you during that meeting, and as well, it opened up a 1-month comment period that we received a handful of comments. So we now have the revised draft plan based on those comments. We also, as it pointed out here, took the opportunity to fix a couple of typos and so forth. So very briefly, I'm going to mention some of the comments and some of the changes that you'll see in the plan. And this was all in the mail out packet. And of course, as you've already moved and seconded, the resolution to approve the plan today. So here's a review of the comments that were raised on July 19th. So safety information, we're not able to bring newer safety information. That was the gist of the question in July, but we do pledge to come back when we have new information available and then work with our committees as well. Do we have the greenhouse gas information? Do we address labor practices, workplace issues, delivery efficiency? And those are things that we first referenced the other COG TPB activities in that regard that are looking at greenhouse gases and safety. But we also have the plans to continue and amplify those discussions at future freight subcommittee. There wasn't much that we could change in the document at this time. We did add some information about the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority and the Long Bridge. And we did add some information about air cargo volumes at National Airport in contrast to Dulles and BWI, and It's definitely a different story because Dulles and BWI have dedicated major warehouses, freight facilities, freight handling facilities that don't exist at DCA. So you'll not find those cargo volumes there. Had a couple more comments that came in after the meeting and during the comment period. We'll adhere to the membership geography that we have now. Perhaps soon there'll be some changes in that, but for now, that's what's reflected here. We really weren't have an ability to enhance the graphics, but we can certainly try better next time. And we did make an update to reflect a recent change in the tip for the Fairfax County Parkway. As you consider Resolution R3-2024 to approve the plan, just to reiterate that we have an ongoing freight planning process as a part of our metropolitan planning process. And there's only so much that we can capture in the static document here, but this is a venue that we can, that we address a lot of things and we can keep the conversation going, including the freight subcommittee. And, we're very happy with the freight subcommittee and bringing in both the public and private sector stakeholders. We do reference some of the findings and recommendations that you saw in the plan back in July and offer it as a resource to our member agencies as we do their planning moving forward. Therefore, Mr. Chair, staff recommends TPB approval of R3-2024 to approve the new National Capital Region Freight Plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Meese. At this time, we're going to provide an opportunity for questions or comments, and we'll start with members from the District of Columbia. Are there any questions from the state of Maryland?
Miss Cindy DeBala has a question.
Thank you. I noticed in the minutes of the agenda from last meeting that there was a discussion about greenhouse gas goals and greenhouse gas and efficiency and renewable related program efforts. I see in the document that there is some reference to them. Just to clarify, because it is a pretty important area and a fast moving, fast developing area with 73% of the freight volume being on roads. It's a big deal. So two things, you were not able to change anything in the document at this time, but you, if I understood correctly, but you want to pursue the topic. Could you say in the Freight Rail Committee, could you please say a little bit more about both of those? Thank you.
I might turn to Kati Shrikant, but I think the approach is that we'll take our cues from the dedicated planning resources that we have for greenhouse gas. It's not, the freight subcommittee isn't going to do a different one, or off on its own, that it's really going to be in coordination and reflective of where we're addressing those in the overall work program.
Yeah, I'm happy to enhance on that a little bit, Ms. DeBala. So both at COG and at TPB, there is ongoing work activities on developing inventories of greenhouse gases by sector. So as part of that work activity, we will look into identifying how best we can identify greenhouse gases from freight vehicles versus regular other non-freight vehicles. So that is as part of the ongoing greenhouse gas inventory. That is not something that the freight subcommittee would be doing, but that is something that the environmental activities would be doing. When that information is available, that information would be part of all of the documentation we have about greenhouse gases, but the same information will also be reflected in the freight plan as well. And members may recall about 4 months ago, there was a proposal by the US EPA to enact specific greenhouse gas emission standard for trucks. And the TPB commented on that, supporting that and saying that this was going to be one of the critical things we will need to help us make advancement towards reducing the on-road greenhouse gas emissions.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah. I'm doing good, Bob. How are you?
It might be some side conversation if somebody's not muted. I don't see any other hands raised or questions in the chat.
Okay. Okay. So if there aren't any further questions or comments, and we do have a motion on the floor in a second, are there any abstentions or nays to the request? Appearing that there are none, this motion does pass. So we have three very interesting informational items that we will address at this time. And I want to make sure that we have time to hear directly from all three presenters. So if you will, and if there are any questions, and we're unable to get to all of them today, please put those in the chat and we'll get responses directly from staff. And we'll also be able to bring the topics back for a deeper review and discussion. So again, we're ending with three informational items. The first is the new federal funding programs for carbon reduction. It's directly related to the newest regional priorities that we as a board worked on a couple of years ago, and that is mitigating and adapting to climate change. We have Aaron Morrow on staff who will now brief us on new federal programs and funding that is now available to help reduce greenhouse gases within the transportation sector, including on-the-road vehicles. And Mr. Morrow, are you here?
Hi, thank you. Good morning.
Or Aaron, I'm sorry.
So today I'm going to provide an overview of new federal funding programs under the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law that are dedicated to shifting the United States away from fossil fuel use and reducing greenhouse gas emission. The 5 programs I will speak about today will have the potential to reduce specifically on-road transportation greenhouse gas emissions. We believe it's important that the board is aware of these new federal funding programs that are available to assist in reducing on-road greenhouse gas emissions, given that the TPB has established climate change mitigation as one of its policy priorities and has adopted specific greenhouse gas reduction goals for the transportation sector. For each of these programs, I will discuss the TPB's role and any past or planned committee or board briefings. Here are the federal programs that I will discuss today. The first 4 programs, the Carbon Reduction Program, the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program, the Charging and Fueling Infrastructure Discretionary Grant Program, and the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Formula Program are all new programs under either the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law or the Inflation Reduction Act. The 5th program, the Lower No Emission Vehicle Program, has existed for several years, but the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law has significantly increased the funding. These 5 programs will invest over $20 billion nationally over 5 years to reduce carbon emissions. All of the program names are underlined because those are hyperlinks to the program website where you can find more information. And there's also a memo for this agenda item that provides additional links, a summary of these programs, as well as links to fact sheets and federal guidance. Staff in your transportation departments are likely aware of these programs and are thinking of how best to avail these funds to take actions that will reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So the first program I'm going to discuss today is the Carbon Reduction Program. This new program is specifically designed to reduce carbon emissions from on-road transportation. This program does 2 things. 1, it asks state DOTs to develop a statewide strategy for reducing on-road carbon emissions. 2, it provides funding to the states to implement eligible projects and programs to reduce on-road transportation emissions. So the carbon reduction strategies that are required of the states shall support efforts to reduce transportation emissions and identify projects and strategies to reduce these emissions. These strategies must be updated at least every 4 years, and the state should consult with any MPO in the state. The drafts are due by, the documents are due by November 15th of this year. The Carbon Reduction Program provides $6.4 billion in formula funding nationally from FY 2022 through FY 2026 for projects designed to reduce on-road transportation emissions. This table shows the amount of money from each of the 3 states that is set aside for our region. The total for our region in each FY 22 and FY 23 is about $12.5 million. Now, compared to the investment that our region needs to support climate mitigation for on-road transportation, this really isn't a lot of money. But it is new money that we didn't have before, and the funds can be combined with other pots of money to have a greater impact. If the funding levels for our region remain at least the same over the 5 years of the program, our region would see an investment of over $60 million. So the TPB Technical Committee received a briefing on the Carbon Reduction Program in April. As part of the TPB's consultation role on the state carbon reduction strategies, the state DOTs are scheduled to present their draft reduction strategies to both the TPB Technical Committee and the TPB next month. As part of the TPB's coordination role with the states to select the projects for the Carbon Reduction Program funding, TPB staff are working with the state DOTs to determine how the TPB can provide input on project funding. Projects funded through the Carbon Reduction Program must be identified in the TIP. The next program is the Climate Pollution Reduction Grants Program, which provides grants to states, regions, and local governments to develop and implement plans for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and other harmful air pollution. So this program, unlike the others, is not just for on-road transportation. It is economy-wide, which includes on-road transportation, as well as sectors like energy, buildings, and waste. The CPRG program has 2 stages. The first provides funding of over $250 million for non-competitive planning grants, and the second will provide $4.6 billion in competitive implementation grants. COG will receive $1 million to lead planning work for the metropolitan statistical area, and that work will include the development of a priority climate action plan. The transportation agencies will be a part of that effort. Thank you. The priority climate action plans are due in March. It is important to know that in order to be considered for competitive implementation grants in the second phase, projects should be included in the priority climate action plan. And you will hear more about COG's plans to develop an action plan in the next agenda item when you receive a briefing on the CPRG program from Jeff King from COG's Department of Environmental Programs. Next program is the Charging and Fueling Infrastructure Discretionary Grant Program, or the CFI program, which will strategically deploy publicly accessible electric vehicle charging and alternative fueling infrastructure in places where people live and work. The first round of funding availability was announced in the spring of this year. COG submitted a request for funding on behalf of 7 jurisdictions for 48 proposed locations, and this work was coordinated through COG's Regional Electric Vehicle Deployment Working Group. Additional proposals in our region were submitted by the District of Columbia, City of Alexandria, Prince William County, Montgomery County, and the Maryland Clean Energy Center. So out of the 48 sites in COG's proposal, 30 of those sites, or 63%, are located either in or near disadvantaged communities. and all proposed projects will follow TPB's safety policies, programs, and guidance. Another notice of funding availability is expected in early 2024. In order to support future funding applications, as well as to support regional electric vehicle planning in general, TPB staff have commissioned the development of a regional electric vehicle infrastructure implementation strategy. This project is funded through the TPB's UPWP Technical Assistance Program and is being developed by TPB's on-call consultant, ICF. The consultant will provide electric vehicle projections for 3 forecast scenarios and recommend priority sites for EV infrastructure installation by county, which we hope will be a blueprint for EV infrastructure planning at the regional level. COG's Regional Electric Vehicle Deployment Working Group is overseeing this project. The draft projections will be presented at the working group's meeting tomorrow. The TPB Technical Committee will see draft results of the whole project at its January meeting. And we will schedule presentations on the final strategy for both the TPB Technical Committee and the TPB in the spring. The next program is the NEVI Formula Program, which provides funds for states to strategically deploy electric vehicle charging infrastructure and establish an interconnected network to facilitate data collection, access, and reliability. It requires states to develop a statewide plan, which will be updated annually. Initial plans were submitted in August of 2022. Both the Freight Subcommittee and the TPB Technical Committee received briefings on the initial plans. And the last program I'm going to discuss today is the Low-No Vehicle Program. The Low-No Vehicle Program received a substantial boost of funding from the bipartisan infrastructure law, going from $84 million in FY 2019 to $1.22 billion in FY 2023. FY 2023 round of grants included 4 awards in the TPB region: WMATA, University of Maryland, City of Alexandria, and Loudoun County. The TPB continues to support applications by agencies in the region through support letters and makes amendments to the Transportation Improvement Program to ensure the receipt of federal funding. So that was an overview of 5 programs that could help our region reduce greenhouse gas emissions from on-road transportation. Again, there is a memo that accompanies this presentation that has more detail on these programs and links where you can find even more detail. TPB staff will continue to schedule briefings for the board and its committees on these programs as appropriate. And if there's time available, that concludes my presentation and I can take questions.
Thank you, Erin. At this time, are there any questions? From any of the jurisdictions?
We're looking through the chat. We don't see any questions yet. As Erin noted, these are all new funding programs that's available to the state and local governments. It's over a 5-year period. We are in the very first year. So there will be more opportunities for our member agencies to conceive of and to work to procure funding to implement many of the strategies that the TPB evaluated and estimated with regards to their potential contributions in the climate change mitigation study that the TPB did in 2017, 2018 timeframe. So I think the, I'm sorry, 2021, 2022 timeframe. The opportunity here is we have done the studies, we have identified the strategies, and now there is federal funding being made available. So for a local government, for a state government, or regionally to collectively think of and come up with actual projects or programs that we can implement, now would be an excellent time to do that. So that's the opportunity here. So this is the first of the many briefings. Next month, you will hear from all 3 states within the TPB planning area. What is each state's statewide strategy for reducing greenhouse gases? So We will hopefully be able to see, we've been working with them over the past couple months. They all have assured us that the TPB's climate policy priorities will be considered and it will be informing their statewide strategies, that the climate change mitigation study is also something that will inform their strategies. So I think it's a good timing and a good opportunity where the regional level policy studies that the TPB did is now able to find its way into project and programming aspects. Thank you.
Thank you, Kanti. Right now, I'm sorry.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I have just a very quick follow-up question for Kanti. So I'm really very, very excited and really intrigued to see what our state agencies will bring to the table and how they plan to absorb this kind of investment that multi-layered investment. Do we have any thinking going on at the COG level to monitor this, rate of absorption later when we have a set of projects going on and see how this actually changes or how this translates into the goal attainment of the quite ambitious goals that we have set already on greenhouse gas emission reduction?
Thank you. Thank you for the question, Mr. Cantones. So there are two things that's happening. One, at COG and TPB working in partnership, we regularly develop greenhouse gas inventories for each of the member jurisdictions and for the entire region. And we do that by each sector. What is the greenhouse gas emissions attributable to the energy, to the buildings, to the transportation, and to the waste sector. So that work will continue. So that will be one mechanism by which we can track what is happening with the greenhouse gas reductions, how fast it's going, what more needs to be done. The second thing, with this new funding, the carbon reduction program grants, particularly because they are state allocations, formula allocations going to the state, there is a federal requirement that those projects implemented with those funding, there is a monitoring and reporting element with that. So we will be working with the states in documenting what projects are done and what their estimated emission reductions are. It will likely be hard to verify on an individual project level because it would be reflective of all the other things going on in the society. But we certainly will be able to have some sort of a documentation on the anticipated contributions from those projects being implemented with this funding.
Thank you, Kanti. What I am after is, we made our plans here. We committed to goals without that money being really firm in the horizon. There was some general expectation at the time, but not really specifics. So I want to be able to, at some point down implementation timeline, to be able to say, look, that money was really well invested because it enabled us to come so much closer to our goal, to perform so much better than without. So, because this is a significant policy assessment that needs to be done. This money, I expect this to be really transformational in some places, and I want this signal not to go down into kind of the general performance of all other policies and programs implemented that were already in the books. Does it make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you for sharing that expectation. We certainly will work with the state DOTs as each year when this new funding is allocated to projects and programs, we will work with them. One of the things we have heard in the initial conversations that staff has had with these 3 state DOTs is all of them appear to be thinking that they can use this money as leverage with other funding that they have to advance projects earlier, so that they can be implemented and those benefits, particularly emission reduction benefits, can be availed sooner. So again, as Erin noted, $12 million to me is a lot of money. It was $12 million that we did not have. But in the grander scheme of things, when you break that into 3 separate jurisdictions, how much will $3 million get you in terms of greenhouse gas reductions by itself? However, if that $3 million can be leveraged with an additional $15 million that the state or the local jurisdictions were planning to implement and advance that project, then we might have a greater bang for the buck. So I think that's what the states are telling. So it's promising, but we'll need to keep track of it. As you were saying, every year, keep note of how are we leveraging, what is it that's happening, and how soon was this project being able to implement.
Thank you.
Before we move forward, are there any additional comments or questions? Okay. And Erin mentioned during her briefing the climate pollution reduction grant. At this time, Program Director Jeff King will talk in more detail about this particular project.
Thank you, Chair Collins. Good afternoon, everyone. Jeff King here with the COGS Department of Environmental Programs, the Climate, Energy, and Air Program. I'll give you a briefing today on the EPA Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program, otherwise known as CPRG. The CPRG program was, next slide, please. Oh, I can control that myself. The CPRG grant program is out of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and it provides grants to states, regions, and local governments to come up with plans and ultimately projects for implementation to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and other pollutants. It was funded out of the Inflation Reduction Act. Really interesting grant. I haven't seen one quite like it. EPA is releasing, or has already released, the grants, the formula grants to do both the MSA level and state level plans. And Erin mentioned that Priority Climate Action Plan, the PCAP, and the Comprehensive Climate Action Plan. So PCAP is the one that we need to do first. And unlike anything I've seen in the past, at least in my grant work, they're doing a parallel process. There's going to be a competitive NOFO, and in fact, that competitive NOFO was released today, this morning, and staff can put that link to the NOFO in the chat, so you can take a look at that. But real interesting, in order to be eligible for the $4.6 billion in competitive grants for projects, energy sector projects, transportation projects, and the like, you have to have those projects in the plan. And that PCAP is due March 1st, 2024. So we have this fall and winter to come up with that Priority Climate Action Plan. But this program will continue. It's a 4+ year program. The CCAP's not due until a bit later. So real interesting. Like I said, non-competitive allocations to the states and MSAs. And interestingly, I think something like 67 metropolitan statistical areas got a formula grant of $1 million. In our case, DC metro region was excluded from that group, and we actually, the EPA and the District of Columbia negotiated, and of the $3 million that was allocated to DC for the state level plan, they're passing through $1 million of that to COG to manage the MSA level plan. And that's an interesting thing I'll talk about later in the slide deck, that, COG is a region, 24 member governments. We already have a climate action plan in place, adopted back in 2020, but the MSA involves counties that are outside of the COG footprint. So we'll get to that in a second. So this slide gives you the elements of the plans that are required. So I mentioned the PCAP is due March 1st, 2024. really a simplified plan. We need a simplified greenhouse gas inventory. We're already starting with a pretty comprehensive one, actually, for at least the COG member footprint, but we will need to expand it to the larger MSA. And we'll need to identify priority measures to put into that plan that we would want to see as eligible for the competitive funding. And since we now have the NOFO, we can see what kind of projects they're looking for and how they'll be, what criteria will be used to evaluate those. And since that NOFO came out today, not quite ready to speak to that, but it's good to know what kind of projects we're going to be seeking as part of that process. For the PCAP and for the CCAP, we're going to need to look at a LIDAC, low income disadvantaged community benefits analysis, like other grant programs, federal grant programs. There is a requirement that we focus the benefits of these in the Justice 40 communities. There's going to be a need for a lot of engagement with stakeholders, including with the EJ community. There's also a need to include in the plan a review of the authority to implement the projects, which I'm sure we should be able to do with no problem. The CCAP doing something in 2025 expands the requirements a little bit, a more comprehensive inventory, projections out to 2035, 2050. Interestingly, our COG footprint region already has a 50% reduction by 2030 goal in our currently adopted plan. But our, at least COG's 2050 goal is 80% reduction. So we will have to look at, and it's an interesting question. We haven't quite started thinking about this fully yet, but the EPA requirement is that we must demonstrate in that CCAP that the work we're doing with the projects and programs under the plan will lead us towards net zero by 2050. Now, whether or not we actually have to formally adopt a net zero by 2050 goal, I think there's some conversations to be had. There's some other additional analyses we need to do for that CCAP, like looking at co-benefits analysis. And as Conti was just saying, I think the EPA here is also looking at really wanting this funding opportunity to look at how do we leverage other federal funding programs and other state programs, et cetera. Also for the CCAP, we'll need to do a workforce planning analysis. So I mentioned the MSA includes all of our existing COG member jurisdictions, and this slide shows the counties and city that we'll need to work with as part of the larger MSA. So pretty much the Virginia counties to the west of our region, that would be Warren and actually Jefferson County, West Virginia, Warren County, Clark County, and then to our south and also west, Culpeper, Fauquier, Rappahannock, Spotsylvania, Stafford, and the city of Fredericksburg. So we are just now, we briefed the chief administrative officers this month for our region, so we will be seeking appointments or nominations from the CAOs of our COG member jurisdictions for folks to represent jurisdictions on a steering committee. We will be reaching out to agency staff directors and folks that we work with regularly to invite participation in a technical committee. We already have the 3 state air agencies participating. We're reaching out to the state DOTs. So I think in October, we'll start kicking off the program and looking at some meetings for steering committee kickoff, and then through the fall, some technical engagements. For the new member governments, similar kind of deal, although they do not sit on our CAO committee. So we're starting with some kind of targeted outreach, and we'll be sending letters to the CAOs of these new counties we need to engage with. I mentioned the significant requirement that we do community engagement, particularly in the LIDAC. So that'll need to be a high priority for us under this project. And it will be a multi-sector engagement, including transportation. And I mentioned the NOFO is out, so a lot to read this afternoon and get a better understanding of eligibility. My first glance at it is that COG as the lead for the grant opportunity is eligible, as well as all of our state municipal governments. So, but again, if one of our members or one of these new counties would like to take a lead on submitting a project proposal under that competitive NOFO, they will have to have that project in the MSA plan. I should say the NOFO deadline is April 1st. So the plan would be due March. The competitive proposal for that for the implementation funding is April 2024. That's all I have. Chair Collins, ready to answer any questions.
Okay, Mr. Collins, if I could just add, the key takeaway for the TPB transportation agencies is this. So this plan document is due to the feds by March 1st of next year. Very little time. But one of the key things, that $4.6 billion in federal discretionary grant that was announced this morning will be available for any project, transportation projects included, but that project will have to be in this climate action plan that will be submitted on March 1st. So as you all have, I'm sure, since you all supported the TPB adopting this greenhouse gas reduction goals, I'm sure you are working with your transportation agencies to identify what projects and programs you all can implement at the local level. As that work is progressing, any project ideas or program ideas that your staffs may have, it'll be important to bring that to this carbon pollution reduction grant program study within the next 4 or 5 months, have that described adequately, make sure that those project programs meet whatever criteria that this study may choose to adopt, and including those projects in this plan document will be very important. If not, it may be hard for those projects that are conceived of later to get some of this $4.6 billion in federal grant. So that was all I wanted to add, Mr. Collins, and back to you.
All right, thank you. Now, the next item is COG Round 10 Cooperative Forecast of Population, Households, and Employment. And Planning Department Director Paul Desjardins will brief us on the latest set of forecasts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. I'm very pleased to be here with you. Kim is setting up the presentation. I'm going to spend a little bit of time with you talking about the forecast, some of the assumptions that went into them. The key thing to take away is these are the official growth inputs that will go into the air quality conformity analysis of Visualize 2050. These are the inputs that are used on a regular basis in all the transportation models and assessments. And that is why we are bringing this to you. The COG Board of Directors approved the forecast back in June, so this really is an update to you on what is contained in the forecast. Very quickly, the history. COG's planning directors established this program back in the mid-70s to come up with a consistent set of growth projections that would guide local and regional planning programs, as you see there. Each major series or each major round of forecasts goes to a horizon of about 20 or 30 years into the future. And as I mentioned earlier, these are the official inputs, not just for the TPB, but also for MWAC, for CPC. The forecasts played very, very heavily into the COG housing targets work from a number of years ago, pivoting directly from the Long Range Plan Task Force. Very quickly, this is a summary of every set of forecasts that has been adopted, going all the way back to 1976. The first series, round 1, each of those green highlighted texts shows you when a major round was approved, culminating most recently with round 10.0 in this year. Something I would also call to your attention is beginning in the early 1990s, the planning directors, in response to the initial drafting of the surface transportation legislation, ICE-T and the Clean Air Act amendments, established a policy that permitted but did not require updates as frequently as every year. And that's why you see 5.1, 5.2, 6.3, and so forth. Those were those incremental updates based on local government plan changes or different investments in transportation facilities. Quickly, here is a flow chart of how the process actually works. We refer to it euphemistically as top down, bottom up. Top down is that blue box in the upper left corner, the econometric model, maximum amount of growth that we foresee in the region. That is our guidepost to which we index the box that you see in the lower left corner, the red local government projections that are prepared independently by local governments, near term based on permitting activity that's occurring right now in the near term, 5 years or so, and then guided by comprehensive plans for longer periods into the future. Reconcile the forecasts, and the key element is that each member local government prepares projections for the individual traffic analysis zones, and that's what you see in the end, culminating in one complete consistent set of forecasts. Touched on these in the chart earlier, but just to review very quickly the steps we went through for round 10. We looked at the economic conditions nationally and globally, and I'll touch on a little bit of a deeper dive we did for this round than we have done in a while in just a minute. We gave base year employment and housing data to your planning departments for them to begin to prepare their projections. We came up with the econometric model forecast, what I showed to you in that last slide in the blue box in the upper left corner. And again, we reconciled the projections beginning about this time last year. We were beginning the reconciliation process. And then earlier this summer, we were receiving and compiling the actual small area TAZ forecast from each of your local government planning departments. I mentioned a minute ago about how we did a slightly deeper dive. And one of the things that we really were so very keenly aware of is what are the near-term and long-term potential effects on growth due to COVID. We talked about this fairly extensively a year ago at the COG board leadership retreat during the summer about what are COVID impacts. And our approach for the forecast was we engaged our on-call consultant, ICF, to really help us look at sort of three components of the forecast. First, what was the potential range given a whole host of regional and national trends that the forecast might be bounded by? The least amount, the maximum amount of growth, as well as the most likely. Secondly, we asked them to look into what are potential changes to future average household size. We know there's a lot of demographic trends that come to bear nationally and locally, housing costs, a whole host of things, but really to try and get a sense of going forward, what would the composition of individual households likely be? And then also looking at space utilization, commercial space utilization, office and retail space in particular. Local governments, when they prepare the projections, they look at parcels of land, determine literally the square footage that either is on the ground now or is likely to be there by right, and then make calculations about the number of workers that would occupy that space. So this is a pretty critical metric in determining future employment growth. And then lastly, and again, I alluded to housing costs, also looking at COVID impacts and some of the spatial changes we've seen about the impacts on the timing and location of future housing growth. So very quickly, I won't touch on every element of this, but just to give you a sense of some of the background that ICF shared with us, they looked at prior issues or prior pandemics, if you will, and particularly the influenza, the epidemic of 1918. And again, the next couple of charts that I'm going to share with you are a bit dated. I'll update a few of the points as I go through, but this was their work during 2021 and early 2022. And they concluded, not the least of which what we're seeing now is we're a resilient region, we're a resilient nation. And yes, we do have these inflection points, but we do tend to come back stronger in many ways. Also, some societal things that ICF pointed out is that even coming out of the 1918 influenza outbreak, growth continued in large urban centers. And that most of the trends and the impacts, if you will, really sort of came to kind of an equilibrium within about 20 years or so. ICF, as this was unfolding, again, we were still in the midst of the pandemic, looked at things that we continue to monitor today, specific things like office vacancies, return to office, transit utilization, all indicators, as I said, we continue to monitor on a regular basis. At the time, that third bullet, we noted that office occupancy was about 37% of pre-pandemic. It's increased, but really since the first of the year. It's really kind of hovered at about 47, 48%, which puts us sort of in the middle when you look at major metropolitan areas across the country. We also looked at, and even the planning directors have had conversations about, given sort of the slowness of the recovery for the office markets, what are the opportunity for office to residential construction? So again, that was something we considered and looked into a bit. Corollary to this is a trend. As you can see, this is research by Brookings and ICF, but really points to the fact that for many years, office space utilization has been changing. The rough rule of thumb many years ago would have been about 250, or as you can see at the far, far left of that chart, almost 500 square feet per worker. But even prior to the pandemic, we were moving into open floor plans. We were moving into hot seating, if you will. And this is a trend that clearly is going to be continuing in this region. Another trend that ICF looked into was that we are actually on the cutting edge when it comes to our workforce on a number of fronts, not the least of which is we have one of the best educated workforces in the country. And we talk a great deal about how that is a tremendous asset and strength. But when you look at that box in the upper right-hand corner, ICF looked into the fact that there are specific industry sectors that are particularly prevalent, particularly appropriate for telework. And those, as you can see, and I'll touch on in just a second, are some of the strengths of our own economy here, particularly service sector jobs. And then lastly, we asked ICF, as I mentioned, to look into changes in household size. This is a pretty dramatic chart. If you look on the far left-hand side, you can see how average household size plummeted between 1970 and 1980s. It increased slightly between the 90s and sort of the 2020 period. But going forward, ICF sees household size declining again, though not nearly as quickly or quite as dramatically, precipitously as what we had foreseen during the 70s. So here's one of the first products of ICF's research. Again, we asked them to bound the likely range of forecasts for this region. The central bar, or central set of dots, I should say, part of that line is sort of the baseline of employment. The lower line is the minimum, the least amount of likely job growth that ICF foresaw that we would get in this region, about 3.6 million jobs, all the way up to a maximum of about just under 4.3 million jobs. So again, taking all of these other factors into account, what was their perspective on where we should be bounding our future growth? Companion to that is population. Again, the lower line, the bottom line could be a minimum of about 6.3 million people in 2050 to a maximum of about 7.5 million is the range. But the baseline was in the middle of about 6.8 million people. And then lastly, the companion to both of them is projections of household growth, again showing the range from a low of about 2.5 million to a maximum likely of just under 3 million, 2.9 million total households for the region. So I mentioned the econometric model and want to touch on just a couple of key elements coming out of that because these are in fact significant drivers of our future growth. What you're looking at here is a companion of current employment in that sort of teal blue portion of each bar. And then the red portion of each bar is the increment of growth expected in that industry sector over the next 30 years. So call to your attention in the center, professional and business services. Again, the strength of our economy, a testament to our tremendously talented workforce. We'd add almost or more than 250,000 jobs in professional and business services over the next 30-year period. When you roll together professional business services, educational, health, and all other services, those four categories together, fully 75% of all the wage and salary jobs that we expect between now and 2050 would be in those sectors. Again, reflecting the current composition of our workforce and our ability to continue to attract talented workers. Companion to the employment trends, this is a very detailed chart looking at growth across a number of different age cohorts. So each set of bars, the color-coded portions relate to an age group. So the bottom set of bars in blue is for very young children through the age of 14. And then on the top, you see for the elderly 65 and above. A couple of things to point out here that are very good is we do see strong, steady growth in our workforce population, 25 to 44-year-olds. What I would really call to your attention is in the upper right-hand corner, population 65 and above would add about 1.2 million people, or about a 6.64% increase in the elderly population. I say that guardedly, but in the population 65 and above. That's an important factor. That is the greatest rate of increase in population in our region. And when we discussed this at the COG board, we talked about, well, what are the human service challenges that relate to that? So call that to your attention. It's healthcare, it's elder care, it's a whole host of things. It's mobility concerns, many, many things as we go forward. So I spent a lot of time talking about what went into the forecast, and I'm going to shift and talk about the forecasts themselves. And so this is in fact a summary table of the forecasts. What you'll see is about a million more jobs over the next 25 years or so, between 2020 and 2030, or 2050 rather, about 1.5 million people during that 30-year period, and about 700,000 households. Again, fairly balanced when you look at the relative rates of growth, particularly the rate of job growth and household growth are almost spot on with one another, which is very good compared to some prior earlier rounds from many, many decades ago. Importantly, though, and we're very well aware and briefed the COG board, and we discussed what were the impacts of COVID, particularly on the employment market at the outset. And what you see carrying through here, this is a comparison of the differences between the new round 10 forecast for the region as a whole compared to the old 9.2 forecasts from several years ago. So what you can see on that first row is going out throughout the forecast period. We lost, averaging for all of 2020, a little bit under 200,000 fewer jobs than we had, or are now expecting about 200,000 fewer jobs than what were being projected for 2020. And that trend continues all the way out through the entire forecasting period, a bit over 200,000 fewer jobs, again, as we are in that sort of recovery, ongoing recovery period, if you will. Population and household, the next two, again, population throughout the forecasting horizon, tiny bit below what had been previously projected, but essentially the same, again, when we're talking millions and millions of people. Same with households, actually a slight increase in the number of households as we go out into the future, about 50,000 households more than previously assumed, but again, very much commensurate with what was in 9.2. So again, the most significant change here is we're looking at about 200,000 fewer jobs in each future forecast year. We have received the data from each jurisdiction and are working through that right now. What I'd like to do is spend just a minute talking about the trends that we see by individual jurisdictions. So this is a comparison chart that looks very much like the employment chart I showed earlier. The dark portion of each bar is the number of jobs on the ground in that particular jurisdiction. The lighter sort of pink color is the increment of growth that's expected into the future. And this is rank ordered based on size. So the District of Columbia at the top has more jobs than any other jurisdiction in the region currently, with about 786,000 jobs. The district expects to gain about 236,000 jobs over the next 30 years, again, followed by Fairfax County, Montgomery, and Prince George's, as you see in the chart. The companion to the previous chart is population. In this case, Fairfax County is actually the most populous jurisdiction in the region, with a bit under 1.2 million people in 2020, followed by very closely by Montgomery County with about 1 million people. Interestingly enough, though, the third row I'd call to your attention, it's Prince George's County in Maryland that is actually expected to add the greatest number of people, with about 237,000 people population growth over the 30-year period. And that's largely attributable to a slightly larger household size that's being assumed for the county. And speaking of households, again, looking at households and household growth, again, the darker portion of each bar, how many households were on the ground in 2030 or 2020 rather, in the increment of growth. Fairfax, again, commensurate with having the largest population, has the greatest number of households. But interestingly enough, the fourth row on this chart, the District of Columbia is actually expected to add more households than any other jurisdiction, but they will be much smaller unit sizes. So again, some interesting dynamics at the sub-regional level when you look at some of these trends. Wrapping up here with just a couple more charts about regional trends. What we're looking at here is a comparison of job growth, population growth, and household growth, but again, across what we refer to as the central jurisdictions, the District of Arlington and Alexandria in blue at the bottom of each bar, the inner suburbs of Montgomery, Fairfax, and Prince George's, the largest collectively most populous jurisdictions in the region, and then the outer suburbs in red shown at the top of each bar. Point out a couple of things. Again, the orange portions of the bars, the inner suburbs, Fairfax, Montgomery, Prince George's would actually see the greatest absolute increases in jobs, but we point out that in terms of both employment and households, the outer suburbs, building on a slightly smaller base, would actually see the faster rates of growth in the population and households. And lastly, looking across the states, again, employment, population, and households, sort of turquoisey blue on the bottom is the District of Columbia. The darker sort of teal blue in the middle is, the suburban Maryland jurisdictions, and then the lighter green portion of each bar on top is Northern Virginia jurisdictions. Again, looking at employment, Northern Virginia would actually add more jobs than collectively Northern Virginia jurisdictions would add more than the district in suburban Maryland. But that second bar in the center, population growth, it's actually suburban Maryland that would add the most people when compared to the other two states. Again, reflecting strong and steady population growth expected in Prince George's County. And then lastly, in households, again, Northern Virginia would actually see the greatest number of net new households. So wrapping up here very quickly, I've touched on some of these points. Again, the district contains the greatest number of jobs, expects to see the most over the next 30 years. Fairfax has the greatest number of people, but as I've said, Prince George's County expects to see the greatest population increase, and Fairfax has the greatest number of households, but the district would actually see the greatest increase in the number of households over the next 30 years. Again, the inner suburbs would see the largest growth, adding more than 427,000 jobs, 652,000 people, and almost 280,000 households. But the outer suburbs would see the greatest rates of growth, as I mentioned before. Northern Virginia would see the largest growth in employment and households, and then the Northern Virginia and Maryland suburbs have almost an identical growth. I failed to point this out when I was showing that chart before. Almost identical growth in population, 647,000 people for both suburban Maryland and Northern Virginia. And lastly, where are we right now? As I said, we have received all the small area data files from your planning staffs and from the other jurisdictions from whom we compile the forecasts, Metropolitan Baltimore, Fredericksburg area, the jurisdictions in West Virginia. We are making final adjustments to that data set, and we would expect that there will be a public release from the TPB staff fairly soon. Again, I mentioned before, these are the official projections that will be key inputs to a whole host of programs. And then lastly, and this is very important because this is really what we do, is our team, Community Planning and Services, together with the forecasting subcommittee and the experts from around our region, we continue to monitor forecasts for the need for potential revisions to the forecast going forward. Because again, we know things are constantly changing, but we believe this to be the best and most likely future for our region. Wrap up here and say, again, copies of these slides, there was a lot here. I covered a lot very, very quickly, but copies of these slides as well as these summary tables, I won't go through these, but there are summary tables of the forecasts included in the attachments for this item in the packet. So that's it, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Happy to answer questions if we have any.
Thank you. Thank you.
Collins, if I could just add before we take questions, the context for this presentation, much like the earlier two presentations, these are the official projections for our region. This is what we will be bringing to you in February of next year, as these are the inputs we will be using to develop the air quality conformity analysis for the new long-range transportation plan, Visualize 2050. As Paul has gone through, your planning directors have been working on it for more than a year, trying to come up with the best sense that they can get on the uncertainties about this new normal that is still evolving and emerging. So there are inherent uncertainties on this forecast, but these are the latest and official estimates, collective estimates for the entire region. So when we analyze the TPB's long-range transportation plan for what might the mobility and accessibility be in the future, how well might our transportation system be performing, what might be the congestion, what might be the emissions, what might be the greenhouse gas emissions, all of that will be based on these projections for the TPB. Additionally, these same projections would be used by many of your agencies in the work that they do. It will be used by COG in the climate change work that they do. So this is one of the reasons why Paul concluded by saying that every year your planning directors meet to evaluate if any of these projections need to change as the ground realities emerge. So this could be our future. It need not be our future as well, as there have been some comments noted in the chat that some of these projections are very sobering. They are not very encouraging, particularly in terms of the type of growth, what types of jobs we anticipate the region gaining, what types of jobs the region may not see much growth in. But that's one of the purposes of this forecast, to encourage us to think what interventions at the policy level, what interventions at the infrastructure investment level can be made to change this trajectory into something that is more beneficial and more acceptable. So that's the broader context in which we bring these projections to you. And Paul will be happy to come back later if there are any specific questions. And we'll be working with Paul's department regularly through this process. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chair.
And thank you. And I see I see a couple of hands up. So staff, if you could kind of manage that. I see Brian K. Lee, and I also see Miss Cindy and Dubala. So if you could, Mr. Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is it still time where jurisdictions can get in their information? I noticed the city of Laurel did not have its information in. I apologize. I don't know why, but I think it would be relevant for you all to see the job projections and growth for the northern end of Prince George's County, and specifically the Laurel area. Thank you.
Good question, Mr. Lee. I should point out Park and Planning Commission in Prince George's is sort of are on point for preparing the small area projections. I will circle back with them, but my understanding was that they did coordinate with Laurel, with Greenbelt, Laurel College Park, and the other municipalities within the county, but I'll confirm that.
Thank you. It's important because generally Laurel would be separated out as the others. As you know, we actually interact with several counties right around. We know our growth rate has been substantial over the last 3 years and projected to be substantial moving forward, with several housing developments coming online and several new businesses coming in. So I would have assumed it would have been separated out as the other cities. Thank you.
Mr. Bala?
Yeah. I think you're muted.
Sorry. 2 questions. One may be technical, and I can take the answer offline. And that is when you pointed out the difference in household sizes between suburban Maryland and suburban Virginia, what that was based on. The second, more policy-oriented question is how will these projections double back to other COG goals, specifically to the housing, the additional housing goals that have been developed for different parts of the metro area by COG? Thank you.
Very good question. So your first question about average household size, this actually comes from individual jurisdictions. So they make the assumption about through the permitting process, what types of units are coming online. Are they larger multifamily units? Are they more single family? Are they, whatever type of structure? And then based upon trends that they are seeing through census data, through school enrollment figures, whatever sort of independent data sources that they can avail themselves of, they make the decisions, the assumptions themselves about what the current and future average household size for them will be. So that's a very good question. I apologize if I didn't clarify that. So I'm glad you brought it up. With regard to how the forecast will be used, as Mr. Shrikant said, these are the official growth projections for COG and each member jurisdiction. So they are used for all sorts of capital improvement studies, be it for transportation, be it for needs for public safety facilities, educational facilities, the full gamut of needs across the community. We did, to your specific question, we did benchmark the housing targets to the prior set of the prior set of cooperative forecasts. And that was how we did the calculus to arrive at what should be the 2030 housing targets. Earlier this year, I came to the COG board and pointed out that we are still well below the housing production targets that we had set as recently as 2019. Again, the pandemic came to bear and cost of materials, supply chain challenges and whatnot. But that is something, because also on my team, I have the housing directors and the housing staff. We are keenly aware of this still as an ongoing challenge and the dynamics of housing cost and how is that influencing not just homeowners in this region, but what does housing cost, housing availability do for our region on sort of a more national competitiveness. If it's too expensive, if it's not, perceived to be an attractive place or an unattractive place because of housing costs, that's a pretty serious impediment. And the business community has come to recognize that over the last 4 or 5 years. So short answer is we have not solved the problem. We're very keenly aware of it.
Mr. DiBella, you're on mute if you had a follow-up comment.
I'm sorry. I look forward to seeing, thank you for the answers, and I look forward to seeing how the Transportation Planning Board can use these numbers in terms of the transportation planning that we're doing. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I see Mr. Alcorn has his hand up.
Yeah.
Thank you. Just very quickly, this is great work. It's hard to overstate the importance of this work. I am glad that you are making it somewhat iterative in terms of updates. Certainly when I talk with our planning folks across different departments and agencies, I know you're getting a lot of the assumptions and the data from them, but then they turn around and say, well, the COG model is driving this. So, sometimes sometimes the assumptions that go in do need to change and be updated, and appreciate you being on this because it is so important. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Fairfax County, tremendously talented staff. I have to call it all of our jurisdictions are tremendously engaged in this process. So it really is a testament to the process and the participation of your local government planning staff. That really is the strength of this.
Any further questions or comments? And thank you again for that report. We're winding down and we have a few more minutes, but are there any further matters before the entire board?
Mr. Chair, just a reminder to please place a work session on your calendar for next month in October, 10:30 to 11:45, for a discussion on the prospects and the issues faced by intercity passenger travel into and out of this region. That will be the work session topic for October.
Thank you.
And this Friday, car free day.
Okay, all right. Any further comments? If there's no further business, then our meeting is officially adjourned. Our next scheduled meeting is October the 18th, 2023. And will that be in person?
Yes, as of now, that's planned to be in person.
That will be in person. Look forward to seeing everyone and have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you all very much.